Well, as Colleen was saying earlier, that we've been talking about authentic voice, authenticity. You hearing you is kind of first and foremost before you are, not before, but you hearing you as opposed to your culturally created self. And that's a really big piece of this journey of finding your authentic self, of projecting your authenticity, speaking your truth, speaking your voice, speaking your authentic self, authenticity. There is a really big journey within this of releasing the layers, but also the empowerment of your true self, your authentic self within. And it is helpful to start that journey of releasing those culturally created layers that happen for us. And when I say that, when I say culturally created self, what I am talking about is all of the things that may belong to us and they may not belong to us. So that can be your generation. We were talking about that before we started the recording. So your age, your generation, the things that we have had become our identity based on maybe that. Maybe it has been through familial influence. Maybe it has been through gender influence. Schooling is a really big place that we pick up a lot of culturally created identity that may or may not belong to us. The just society in general, another big one that we have now is social media, right? What do we, all of the things that we may or may not have as a part of social media, either whether we are reflecting something on the outside in social media that may not be our authentic self, or we are taking in things on social media that we might compare ourselves to, or think that's not me, or maybe that is me. I'd like to live more like that. I'd not like to live like that. All of those things that social media can really bring to the forefront for us. Also, the larger, where we live, even down to the city that we might live in, the neighborhood that we might live in, and then you can extrapolate that out to either the place that we live in or the culture that we are from. So there's all of these things that can create this identity that may or may not be a part of us. Then we can also go into trauma from this lifetime. There's also past lifetimes. There's ancestral history or genetic memory, genetic history, generational history. So there's those pieces as well. Places where maybe disempowerment has been placed upon us. So when we're talking about our culturally created self, that is what we're talking about. That is a part, and it's more encompassing than that. So that's a part of discovery for yourself, to find those places that the identity that maybe you created or the identity that maybe you took on is not aligned with your true self. It's not aligned with your heart, or even all of these other parts of you, your throat chakra, your solar plexus chakra, right? Those kind of outward expressions of you. And there are other things that we might, have within our culturally created self that is also a part of our identity. So it's not to say that all of it is necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of empowerment. There's a lot of things that, as we explore it, that we do identify with. So there's both sides of the coin. It is one of those things, though, that can really cover our true self. And that is a process of discovery, because it is one of those things that you kind of continue to take those layers, peel back those layers so that you can hear you, so that you can live from your authentic self. And an example of this is, growing up so I'm 40 now, and growing up in, coming out of the 80s and 90s, it was all about kind of going to college, getting your degree, being this corporate person. That was a very common identity to strive for in my generation. I'm a millennial. We were talking about that earlier. I'm a millennial. And so then after making that journey and thinking of myself as being that type of person, because that's just kind of who you became, from my perspective. Obviously that's different depending on your different life circumstances. But that's just kind of who, was just kind of the path that was laid out for you, and where you were somewhat expected to go. So I did all the things, right? I did all the things, and then I got into corporate life, and I was like, oh, this is not my identity. This is not who I am. This is a culturally created identity for myself. There's going to be different aspects to that depending on your generation, right? I know Colleen talks about that with her generation, my grandparents with their generation, the generations coming up. There's always going to be different pieces of that depending on that. And this is just one example. And I'm just using this because it's a pretty stark example in my life. So I got into corporate life, and I was like, I was miserable. It was some of the lowest parts of my life is when I was in that time frame. And so I knew at one point that I had to make a change with that. And this is where, Reiki energy, our spiritual path, can help to first of all, have the courage to make changes, right? That's the first thing that is a part of this process, to step out of this path that I had deemed right for myself for 15 years, to step out of that. So the courage, the going inward, and me hearing me, like, wait, I have all of this noise of all of the things, of the expectations of what I should do. And then if I step out of that, in comparison to the people in my life, or the people of like how things are expected of me, this is a very different path. I'm going to have to change paths, which is going against the current, especially at that point, going against the current of what is kind of culturally expected in that time frame. And this was now, it's changed a bit since then. This is, 10, 15 years ago, a little longer, not about 10, 15 years ago, going against the current of shifting that, which is also challenging, right? And the expectations really of kind of everybody, but I would say my parents, I would say that they supported me a lot. Thank goodness. Not everybody's do. I'm very lucky in that, very grateful. And then also, is this what I really want? Where do I go from here? What's the true me? And so I quit, and I dropped out, and I opened a booth at a weekend artist market to support myself in this time frame. And then eventually it all led me to becoming a professional Reiki practitioner. And the moment that happened, actually, I was talking to Colleen, deciding on whether I was in my backyard, deciding on whether I was going to quit my job or not. And I was on the phone with her, and I'm literally asking her this question. And there was this pair of hawks. They were a mated pair that lived, and I lived kind of overlooking this field. And they lived in the giant tree that was in this field. And I had a relationship with them, right? And this is because of kind of my spiritual background and that spirituality of really listening to the messages that hawk has. And they are a messenger. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, do I just make this decision to quit? And this hawk comes, and it is literally floating, flapping its wings in front of me, maybe 30 feet in my backyard, and just sitting in one spot. It's not doing the kind of normal spiraling it does. I know that they do that when they're hunting, but it's facing me. And I'm telling my mom as this is happening, I'm like, this hawk is like sitting here in front of me. And she's like, I think maybe you have your answer. You think I would get that at that point, right? And then I would just be like, oh, you need to listen to this is your right path. And so there's these spiritual aspects that we have. That was a really strong message. Doing self Reiki can help to release these layers because that was such a process. I was so miserable and I had to let go of all of this culturally created identity that not only was a part of my culture, like of my, age and my local culture and all of those kinds of things, but it was also an identity that I had created for myself. And that's a big part of culturally created identity, is that it's also something that we create for ourselves in many times as a part of it. And so it was that moment that I literally quit the next day. And I was like, yep, I'm out. And here's what I'm going to do until I figure my life out. Until I figure out my next steps. And because of this moment, it eventually led me to at least my career's purpose of being in this role, being in Reiki, being in a Reiki business and working with Colleen. And I've never been more passionate about my work, just about the subject in general, about being in community, about helping others, introducing others to Reiki. And I know that this is something that I will do for the rest of my life. And so it is about wading through all the noise of the outside to find your true identity. And sometimes, just as in the journey today, you don't necessarily know what your next step is. You just release the layers. You have Reiki help you to highlight it. And you might take that leap in that moment, even if that leap is healing one layer of your culturally created identity. And you take that one step and you can ask Reiki to help to highlight what's the next step. The path ahead may or may not be clear for you in that moment, and that's okay too. And it's not always about this big jump. This is an example of needing the courage to make this big change in my life. Making this big change in my life. Sometimes it's small changes. Sometimes it's one small healing. Sometimes it's a big healing. Sometimes it's this empowerment of like, oh, this is who I really am in this moment. This is hearing you inside and hearing that piece of you, of that soul, that spirit, and figuring that out so that you can express that in your daily, well, first of all to you, but then in your daily life. And by even making this step, making this change, it also gave other people permission to do the same. And I do see this with my generation now that, we're all kind of starting to come to this. And it's not that it's wrong to be happy and fulfilled in having a corporate job, because that's each our own path. So it's not even like a better than, it just wasn't my path. And so there is that piece of it, and not that there's a responsibility to have, be this person to give other people permission, but you see it more and more as more and more of us are releasing any sort of outside authority, and whatever that looks like. That is also a part of that culturally created identity, and moving it more and more into our inner authority and how we want to live our life, how we want to move forward in the world. And like I said, even if it's not this giant change in your life, that's okay. It doesn't have to be. It can just be one small thing that you're releasing and one small thing that you're empowering more and more of who you truly are, what's really inside. And as you do that, as you continue this process, and Reiki is such a beautiful tool for that, because all we even have to do is set that intention and give ourselves Reiki or receive Reiki from another. And it does that process for you. Sometimes you're going to know what that is, and other times you may not, and that's okay too. What you start to find over time is that you live your life from a more authentic place, a more fulfilled place. And so many of us know this about Reiki, is that it leads us onto a path of wellness. And when I say wellness, we think of it just from a physical place, but wellness is all aspects of us. It's our mental, emotional, it's our spiritual, and as well as our physical health. It's wellness of our community around us. Who are we surrounding ourselves with? So it's every aspect of our life. And as we continue to do this, it does move us into a greater level. And as we move into more authentic self, it moves us into a greater level of wellness and fulfillment within our life. So that's when we're talking about culturally created self, that is what we mean. It is also a place that Reiki helps us achieve.
Well, thank you. And it's true at all ages. And so, given your hawk example, I have to wonder what this message is for me.
I love it.
So, as the saying goes, I'm listening.
Too funny.
What? Well, actually, it was levity and enjoyment, which, if any of you recently listened, my husband retired like 6 days ago. So, and we went to San Diego right away to go visit some friends. I was on the beach, and the pigeons, I mean, that was just one picture. They landed all over me. It was great. And I did not get pooped on. So we're talking there must be some messages in there.
Bird lady. I think the one from Home Alone 2.
I love it.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true at all different stages in life and all different ways. And then, I think I would also add that sometimes the practicalities and circumstances of our life dictate our choices. And then it's how we move into the peace, inner peace with it. And, like rather than seeing it as a social expectation, moving it into a choice of, here are my choices in this circumstance. And, maybe the choices, you really do have to make choices that aren't your first choice, that circumstances are what they are. And so then, Reiki can also help you to land in your own inner knowing. And I've used this example a lot with, caregiving my mom for 7 years. And I can just look back at it. And even though I had feelings at different times, I can say honestly, today I was who I hoped I would be. Not every day, but in the big picture. I had my moments because I'm still human, and there were the challenges because I'm still human, but the practicalities of that circumstance definitely, were a choice I needed to make and wanted to make, even though they were sometimes really challenging. So
I will say, Colleen, that is one of the most helpful pieces of advice when navigating the world. I come back to that kind of mantra a lot: navigating compassion, navigating conflict, navigating support for people, caregiving, all of those things. Even like I say, conflict with others. I think it's a really helpful piece of, what do I say? What don't I say? Where do I have compassion? Where do I have boundaries? Where do I have, speak my truth? All of those things. And I come back to, I want to be who I would hope I would be. And of course we make mistakes. Of course there's things like that, but also apologizing as somebody and fixing a mistake that I've made as somebody that I would hope I would be. And I think that that's a really helpful piece of advice that I actually use really often.
And just letting myself be okay that, yeah, I happen to have those feelings about this right now. And sometimes my actions, I wish they were different, and that's okay too, because I'm still in the place I'm in, and then just using Reiki to help with it